So, okay, so Juan is a UI designer, prototyper, guitarist, musician. He's just created an absolutely belting PhD in the mixed reality lab at the University of Nottingham. I mean, even just the literature review is like friggin' cheesecake, you know. I mean, but the PhD and his work generally is a real eye-opener on all kinds of things like incumbent interaction, design ethnography, Soma design, sonic textiles, guitar augmentation. But it just does that in such a clear way that all those things are used to illuminate each other. And I would recommend that PhD and all his recent papers to anybody interested in music and HCI. Really wonderful piece of work. But let's go over to Juan to give his own introduction and what do you have to say? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction. Let me share my screen. So can everybody see my full screen? I hope so. Yeah, so yeah, I'm gonna be talking about Soma design mostly in this talk, which is, as Simon was saying, part of my PhD. What I'm going to be talking about is somatic explorations in digital musical instrument design. So an overview of this talk would be about this new flashy method of design called Soma design. And then how can we use that method to make instruments, right, or digital musical instruments? So first of all, what is Soma design and what are somatic explorations? So Soma design is based on some aesthetics, and some aesthetics is also like a portmanteau of two things. Soma, which is the lived, sentient, purposive body, and aesthetics, which comes from aesthesis, meaning sensory perception. And this is a term that Richard Schusterman coined to define his method for pragmatic philosophy. He uses the term Soma actually because in his own words, the body as a concept is a bit problematic in some senses because sometimes is conceptualized as an object, but sometimes as a subjectivity. And what he attempts to do here with this Soma concept is to sort of make an amalgamation of everything. So on some aesthetics, how does Richard Schusterman define it? Basically, some aesthetics is like a project of appreciation and cultivation of the body, meaning that it's something that you can practice, basically, not just read about. And it's the body, he defines it as not only as an object that externally displays beauty or sublimity, grace, and other aesthetic qualities, but also as a subjectivity that perceives these qualities and that experiences attendant aesthetic pleasure somatically. So this is kind of like the idea with some aesthetics, and that's how it combines the two things, Soma and aesthetics. It's basically having this appreciation of the lived experience and cultivating that through practice or through like bodily somatic disciplines. So he wrote this very interesting book called Thinking Through the Body and Essays in Some Aesthetics. And I recommend it to whoever wants to know a bit more about his work. And then Kristina or Höök enters the picture. And I think what I find really interesting is how she contests the existing definitions of embodied interaction. And in her early work, she addressed Paul Durich's work quite a lot. You know, she used the work to sort of inspire her own early embodied interaction works. But then she found that there were things that this sort of embodied interaction framework was lacking. Basically, in Kia's works, Durich's concept of embodiment in embodied interaction never really concretely addressed the physical body. And it didn't address either the ways we can and cannot move, how our emotions, attention, and perception are processed through our brain, activating muscles, releasing hormones and things like that, and how those elements would change and be shaped by new interactions. And also, another criticism that she makes is that embodied interaction does not offer an ideal for what to design for, but it's more like an analytical framework, which, as she says, was very important for her early work at the time, but it was lacking some aspects that, as mentioned above, didn't, concretely address the body, its emotions, and etc. So then, during her sabbatical at Florida Atlantic University, Höök meets Richard Schusterman, and then they collaborate, and she learns about his accounts on becoming like a Feldenkrais practitioner, his musings with like multiple somatic disciplines like Zen Buddhism, like the Alexander technique, among many other sort of somatic disciplines and practices. And then she comes up with the idea of applying some aesthetics to interaction design. So then she writes this book, which quite aptly is called Designing with the Body. It's kind of like a hat tip to Schusterman's book, Thinking Through the Body. And this is like the application of some aesthetics to interaction design. So some of the designs that have emerged from Soma design, as you can see, focus a lot on the body. For instance, the Soma mat, which is kind of like a mat that reacts to your body, and then the reading light as well, which is like a lamp that reacts to your reading. But then how do we do Soma design? Because we can sort of look at the books and things like that, but I think it's important to have like a series of practical steps that we can replicate to do Soma design ourselves. And how can we use that method to make instruments? So in my own experience, I'm talking about my own work using Soma design here, and this is not like the definite guide to make digital musical instruments with Soma design, but it's just like an exemplary case that I'm offering in case you want to sort of do Soma design yourself. And the way I would, the first step that I would take is consider a somatic quality that you want to explore. So there are many examples of that, many examples of different somatic qualities like balance or tension and release or collision. And then you should consider a design space in which you want to explore that quality. So in this case, in my own personal cases, it was musical instruments. So the way I sort of not continued, but like the way I applied Kristina Höök's work in my own work was basically thinking about applying this method for digital musical instrument design. So the way I did it, I explored tension and release. I also explored balance, but in this case, I'm going to focus a bit more on the somatic quality of tension and release. And then what do we even mean by tension and release? And in this case, I think the interpretation of that theme can be quite flexible in the sense that you can give it many definitions. It doesn't have to be like a static, concrete definition. And in this case, we explore like different interpretations of the theme of tension and release. One was the physical tension experienced in various parts of the body when playing an instrument. The other one was mental tension of performance and anxiety. And another definition or another interpretation was the expressive buildup and release of musical tension during performance. Again, like I was saying, it's important to be flexible, I guess, with the interpretation. If you sort of had like an static definition of the theme, that wouldn't be helpful. Meaning that if you were rigorous and said, yeah, tension is this physical quality and release is this other physical concrete quality, then you would sort of like narrow your scope quite a lot. So this is kind of like the way you can poetically be creative and use this as a resource for design. Then the third step, in my opinion, would be to engage in somatic explorations, addressing the embodied practice and the somatic quality that you want to explore. So in this case, the embodied practice would be playing musical instruments, and the somatic quality could be tension and release or balance. So yeah, how do you do somatic explorations and how do you reflect on them? So here I'm giving two examples of somatic explorations. One is Feldenkrais and the other one is contact improvisation. But why do we do that, right? So Feldenkrais is an exercise therapy, and it's basically like alternative medicine, and by some people it's even considered quackery, right? But in practice, actually, it's quite helpful to shift focus to specific parts of the body, especially when you're engaging in like a Soma design process. So that's the goal with using this sort of bodily activities during the Soma design process. It's like an approach you use to sort of begin the design process by reflecting on your own sort of bodily sensations, and most of the times this activities are guided by a practitioner. But how do you do it, right? And this is when it gets complicated. Some somatic explorations are often guided by professionals, and for instance, like a Feldenkrais practitioner. But that doesn't mean that you cannot do Soma design if you don't have access to a practitioner, right? You are probably already a somatic connoisseur in something, either like playing an instrument, cooking, running, writing emails, shopping for groceries. Everything is a bodily practice, and there's not such thing as having a disembodied experience of life. And also, you already know your own body, but I also make the question, or do you know it? Because sometimes that's when this sort of bodily explorations are very useful, because they sort of make you reshift your attention into specific areas of your body. And that's kind of like the goal with Feldenkrais or body scans or contact improvisations. The goal is to feel certain areas of the body, or just sort of like try and focus on one specific area. So that's why it's useful to reflect on our own experience using these bodily practices. And there are other things that you can sort of explore in that sense, like autoethnography or microphenomenology, or even like personal journals talking about your bodily experience. And another sort of method that is used quite a lot in Soma design is this thing called body sheets. And they use this quite a lot before and after doing a bodily activity. For instance, you would sort of go to this one of the Soma design workshops, and then you would sort of reflect on your bodily experience before doing the activities. And they have this body sheets with like different adjectives that you can use to sort of like get inspired and describe your own bodily sensations before doing the activities. And then after doing that, after doing the exercises or the contact improvisation or things like that, then you would sort of draw on the other part, which is the after. And you would sort of report on the changes that you might have felt after doing the exercises, or the sort of reflection that you might have gathered after doing them. So now the next step is consider facilitating your own somatic experience to others, but also defamiliarizing your own experience. So in this case, focusing on the guitar, how did we do somatic facilitation in our workshops? One of the approaches that we tried initially was just passing the guitar around people, right? So like one of the things that people reported in one of the workshops was that because they didn't actually play guitar. They felt a bit sort of embarrassed to even hold a guitar, or like show that they're not very good at playing, or things like that. So a way of sort of like breaking this sort of performance anxiety, or whatever you want to call it, we would just pass the guitar around. But also we try things like open tuning, so like to make guitar playing much easier, or just playing with prop and make believe guitars. And something that we reflected afterwards was using like this facilitated guitars, but I'm gonna sort of talk a bit more about that in a minute. So these are like the prop guitars and the make believe guitars. Like on the left, you can see there's a sort of like acrylic plastic guitar that you could sort of use to like play air guitar, but with an actual piece of plastic. And then on the right, Vasiliki is holding the sort of piece of like cushion material, and she's sort of using that as a like a make-believe guitar to sort of describe the crevices and curves of the guitar. But then something that we also discussed was maybe we could have used like this sort of like facilitated guitar. So in this case, I'm showing an example of Jacob Harrison's strumming guitars. So these guitars were designed for like accessible music playing, but in a way you can also think about them as like very minimalistic guitars that really facilitate guitar playing. So this could also be we could have used these guitars as well in a workshop setting to sort of facilitate guitar playing for like non-guitarists. And then another way we tried to do somatic facilitation was by doing the sort of wacky experiments in which, for instance, we would sort of like a guitarist would play guitar, and then someone else would hold their hands on top, so as to feel the experience of playing guitar by just feeling the hands moving, I suppose, rather than having to learn how to play the guitar in order to feel that. But we would also like share a guitar, like in the picture on the right, like someone would sort of fret the chords, and someone else would sort of like strum the strings. So the next thing would be material explorations, and this can very easily become or lead into ideation, conceptualization of new designs, prototyping of new designs, and also like even demonstrating the designs. So here, this is another example of the familiarization, but also another point that I want to make here is that we're starting to see bits of material exploration here as well. So in here, what you're seeing is me playing the guitar, but I also have like two haptic actuators in my fingers, and the person to the left is controlling the rate of vibration, basically. So when I was doing that, I would feel like my fingers sort of getting number. The more the motors were vibrating, the less control I had over my fingers. So that's like an approach that we try to sort of like make me forget how to play guitar, for instance, and make it a bit more unfamiliar for me. And also in terms of other material explorations, there's many things that you can explore. One is the Soma shapes here. And here is not to say that you need Soma shapes or you need Soma bits to do this. This is just like approaches for doing this. And that's why I'm mentioning the bricolage at the end. Because you can basically use any kind of shape or any kind of material to sort of play around and engage in like embodied ideation or embodied sketching activities. So for instance, you could also use this thing called Soma bits, this kit. And this kit has like a different sort of actuators or sensors. For instance, here, there's like on the very left, there's like a haptic actuator, which vibrates, but then in the middle, there's a heat patch, which you can sort of put around your body as well. And then regulate the heat. And then on the very right, there's an inflatable Soma bit as well, which you can sort of like inflate and deflate in different parts of your body. And this is work by Charles Winlin and Anna Stoll and a lot of different people from KTH. And like I was saying, you're not constrained by having those tools. As you can see here in the table, we had a bunch of stuff like guitars, but also like this sort of different shapes, the soft shapes that we could play with, or different sort of actuators. But this could be anything, right? This could be other sort of materials that you have laying around in the lab, or your own sort of like actuators or sensors that you want to explore and play with. So it's pretty open, but it depends on how you use that and how you sort of explore the different spaces that you want to explore. So in this case, we're talking about the guitar and exploring guitar playing and augmenting the guitar in general. So as you can see, the guitar is like the center of the design explorations here. So everything was centered around that and the feeling of playing the guitar. Again, here, there's another table with a bunch of stuff. There's like a Bella on the left. So like, basically what I'm trying to say here is that you're not limited to using either Soma bits or Soma shapes. You can use whatever you want as long as you sort of involve the actual artifact that you want to design for and sort of like reflect on your bodily experience of using that artifact. Here, there's another sort of shot of the workshop where sort of, Nicholas was using an inflatable shape in his abdomen, and he was like playing around the inflation of that Soma bit and how would that feel when playing the guitar. Here's Andrew also exploring like some stretchy materials as well. And in essence, the material explorations also sort of helped us conceptualize different ideas for design. Here it was kind of like using stretchy materials to sort of control the different gestures that you could do with the guitar and different axes. Here, Steve is using also like a series of inflatables in this silent guitar that he brought to the workshop. And he specifically brought that guitar because it's basically hollow, right? So you can sort of put things inside of it. And yeah, this is kind of like and also like a picture of myself. And this is what I'm trying to say here. You can use like different sort of materials to explore design in this case, or ideate new designs. In this case, I was using like a yoga band, which is part of the bricolage that was like laying around the lab. But also I'm using like a Soma bit, like a vibrating actuator on my feet, which is sort of like making vibrations on my feet. And then the Soma shapes, which would like stack on top of each other, and I was standing on top of that and just like pretending to swing my body around, but also like using the stretch yoga band to sort of explore that bodily motion. And that evolve into like this different concepts, different design concepts. One is this soft pedal idea, which you could sort of swing around on top of it, but also like control expression with it. There was the stretchy strap idea, which I'm going to be talking about in the next slides, and the inflatable guitar idea. So all of these are like design concepts. Not all of them were like uptaken, and not all of them became like, you know, high fidelity designs, but they're basically design concepts that you can either like work upon or just like present as new ideas. So how do we actually design digital musical instruments with Soma design? So I took up this idea of the stretchy strap, and during the workshop, we did a little bit of a Wizard of Oz demonstration of how we thought the stretchy strap would work. So I'm gonna show you a video of that. I hope you could hear that, because I don't remember if I shared the sound or not, but okay.
Got it.
Simon, yes, okay, cool. And then I continue to develop that sort of concept into like a more functional idea, because the other example that we were looking at was basically Steve controlling the sound. I wasn't actually making the sound, but in here, this was a Giacomo Lepri's absurd instrument hackathon. And in that hackathon, I took the idea and sort of used e-textiles to make that stretchy strap idea actually into a functioning instrument, as you can see. And then after a few months, I ended up making like a fully fledged stretchy strap controller. And then I also did some work with Andrew McPherson and Alan Benito. We worked together to make this sort of what should I call it? Like, I don't want to say the final version of the stretchy strap, but it's kind of like the best version that we have till this moment. And I'll show you how it works. It's basically, in this case, it's controlling an expression, the expression of a particular effect, which in this case is the wah effect of a guitar, and it's doing that with the actual strap, and it's controlling the effect in a multi-effects pedal board, and it's basically acting as an expression pedal, but it's not a pedal; it's in the strap actually. That's where we are at the moment, but I think there's still more work to do. And that was kind of like my journey through Soma design, but I'm not the only one doing this. There's other new works emerging every time. For instance, Kelsey Cotton et al., they did this inflatable corset, which reacts to the breathing of the person that is wearing the corset, and that they're using that as basically like an instrument that is controlled by your breathing. And it's basically a digital musical instrument that was designed through this sort of somatic experience of singing. Then there's also Carla Taparo's paper from this year actually, and it's also about making well, it's the other way around. So she's sort of exploring bodily awareness through the digital musical instrument, or through NIMEs. And I think in this case, she was also exploring breathing, and she built this sort of wearable sensor to sort of explore the breathing patterns of a person. I don't know if she did it on herself or someone else. Then there's other works like the Soma-based interface design for an improvising musician by Bigani and Erkut. This was presented at MoCo 2020. Also, an embodied audio ethnography example, which is by Mainsbridge, also presented at MoCo. This was in 2022. And then something else that I wanted to mention is that you can also move from the design to reflection, right? And then that can help us make new tools for design, and then we can make new designs with those tools. So like in this case, this is another paper that emerged from one of the workshops that we did, I think in 2018 or 19, I want to say. And in this case, this is actually similar to what Adam was talking about, this sort of like idea of a trajectory. In this case, this participant was describing the sensations that they went through when they were like held upside down in this flying harness. And it's basically the trajectory of the sort of spectrum of like comfort and discomfort through which they went through over time, and the sort of like different feelings that they felt through time as well, sort of like the pins and needles feeling, or the sort of like comfort when they had the vibration bits on their back and things like that. So it's an interesting way you can sort of reflect on a lived experience, and then sort of use that as a design tool, basically, in this case, trajectories. But I think one of the most interesting things are on the works of people doing like DMI design, and not specifically or necessarily calling it Soma design. I think there's a lot of stuff that is being done within NIME, or like other communities, not just NIME in particular, but like in digital musical design, which actually expands Soma design, and I think informs Soma design. And I think there's a lot that Soma design can learn from DMI design as well. So for instance, this is a paper by the Augmented Instruments Lab, led by Courtney Reed. This was, what I found really interesting about this one is that they're also like making this sort of trajectory approach in their own analysis, their own microphenomenological analysis. And in here, Courtney is describing her diachronic experience and synchronic exploration of noticing the sound of a system. So as you can see, there's a lot of detail. I really like this one because there's so much detail about her own experience of listening to someone else's digital musical instrument. There's also Liam Mice's Chaos Belt. I was part of this study as a participant. And I found it really interesting how she was exploring the different sort of like bodily gestures that you would sort of do with an instrument when you were not actually listening to the instrument. So the way the study worked was like she had her instrument, but it was like turned off, and you wouldn't actually hear the sounds that it would make. So you would think about the sounds that the instrument would make in your head, but you would sort of act them out whilst you were playing. And I thought that was really interesting because basically you're not restricting yourself to the sounds that you think the instrument would make, but you're actually focusing on the sort of gestures that you would imagine doing with that particular instrument based on its shape and its configuration and things like that. And the sort of affordances that the instrument gives to you, in this case, the Chaos Bells, they have this sort of like bell shape. And so they sort of make you want to play them with a mallet. There's also, okay, I suppose that's 2 minutes. Thanks. And also Martelloni's work on the percussive fingerstyle guitar. I think there's a lot in there about, thinking about bodily gestures. And as the title says, he was sort of combining the self-reflexive practice of being like a percussive guitarist and using that to design a sort of this augmented guitar that uses that sort of playing style to make music. And I think this is one of my last slides. And also like, I also like this example of Courtney Reed's use of textiles as well to sort of make this a sensor for the throat, which basically senses her singing patterns by sensing the movements of her throat. I think this is kind of like using surface electromyography, but I might be wrong. But I think I found that it was really cool that she was sort of using e-textiles for this particular project. So some takeaways are that Soma design is not dogmatic. What I want to say here is that you don't have to be a Feldenkrais expert, an expert on Soma design, or spend your life learning how to do meditation or things like that to engage in Soma design. I think everyone can engage in this sort of activity. And again, I think it's pretty accessible to everyone as long as they have a sort of notion that we can design a lot by harnessing our somatic sort of experiences and use them for design. And I think most importantly is that Soma design is informed by DMI design. I think that's the coolest part. I think that we are doing a lot of work that actually informs Soma design. And that's it. Thanks.
Fantastic talk. Thank you so much, Juan. So much food for thought. Questions, anybody? Whoops. Oh, there we go. Well, Owen.
I have quite a rambling question, so apologies in advance for that. There's a really good book called Groove by a guy called Tiger Roholt. I don't know if you've known it, you've read it. It's about a phenomenology of musical groove making. And something that jumped into my head whilst you were talking is that he talks quite near the end, he's a drummer, about his experience of learning how to play complex rhythms and how the orientation of your body in terms of large muscle groups in relation to the kit as an assemblage that you've kind of arranged in space for yourself isn't just a matter of convenience or bodily health, but actually creates musical affordances. Like having to move just so actually supports being able to play. Yeah, I think in that case he was talking about complex polyrhythms, and then he kind of draws on something similar that John Blacking said like 50 years ago in his ethnography. So the rambling question I eventually got there is, I guess, to do with bringing this idea of Adams of the socio-cultural scaffolding back in, whether this kind of approach to Soma design can help us in NIME think about the aesthetic affordances that we can actually have. So not just in terms of new noises that we can make by attaching sensors in exciting ways, but what the aesthetic consequences of being able to move our bodies in particular ways and attend in performance to what it is that our bodies are doing and how that might shape the music that we're making.
Yeah, that makes me think a lot about, that particular book that you were talking about reminds me of The Ways of the Hand by David Sotno as well. So like, I really like that book because he sort of reflects on the experience of learning to play jazz piano for the first time. And I think that sort of information is really valuable, I think, in terms of, as a designer as well. I think you can learn a lot about the different ways he describes the experience of learning for the first time, and the way he speaks about these different sort of chord clusters, and the way he would sort of grab the piano in a particular by putting his hand in a particular shape, and how that became like an intuitive process. And I think in terms of like doing digital musical instruments, I think that sort of process should be explored a lot as well. Like, I don't know if everyone has done it yet. Maybe I'm missing a paper in there, but like, yeah, I think there's a lot that we can learn by doing this sort of like self-reflection on this kind of instruments as well, because they have different sort of mappings, different sort of inputs, different sort of sounds, but I think they all sort of share a bodily sort of approach to the instrument, especially when you're improvising with this digital musical instruments. And yeah, I don't know I think that was a rambly answer for a rambly question, but yeah, I don't know if I answered your original question, but yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about in this space.
Cheers.
Tom?
Yeah, hello. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, really interesting. That was just jumping off that. It was making me think of something like Derek Bailey and learning to play with a disability as his hands kind of froze up more and more in his later improvising playing years. And I wondered if that was something you'd engaged with much in your work, or seen other people engage with, you know, people with different ranges of movement, and how they might think of the body differently in musical sort of situations.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's definitely something I considered when I was writing my thesis. One of them, the main elements that I think are crucial when designing an instrument is basically the body, right? You have to consider the body first and foremost. And there's definitely many different kinds of bodies, right? There's not just one like this canonical body. Everyone has a different sort of body, a different set of competencies with their body, limitations as well. And there's also, for instance, Simon was talking about this from my work, as with my PhD work, this idea of encumbrance, right? So encumbrance is when you sort of are holding something else in your hand and you want to do something else, and you're basically encumbered by that other artifact interfering in the sort of bodily activity that you want to do. In the case of playing guitar, for instance, whilst trying to learn something using a computer, you often find yourself sort of like shifting between playing and sort of navigating the internet with the computer. So that's a very specific case of encumbrance in there. But you could also frame it as a situational impairment as well, in the sense that you could see it both ways, right? Like you could say that the computer is impairing your use of the computer. I mean, sorry, the guitar is impairing the use of the computer, or you could say that the computer is impairing the use of the guitar. So yeah, there's a lot in there about adapting an instrument to someone's bodily condition, definitely. So yeah, just to answer your question again, I think, yeah, there's definitely something that we need to consider, the different sort of bodily configurations.
Is there research out there that's explicitly put these together in music? Do you know
what do you mean?
So connected Soma design with thinking about, say, disability or access to music?
I think not that I'm aware of yet, but I think it would be a very nice application for that.
I think what I'm going to suggest is, if anybody wants to make a cup of tea and come back and ask the speakers any questions, or just generally chat about anything.